The aim of my sermon series that I'm doing on this is to explain the redemptive historical significance of these nativity songs in Luke's gospel, and to do so particularly with reference to the temple cultus, worship as it was carried out in the temple in the Old Testament, and before that in the tabernacle, and so on. And the thesis that I wish to develop in this series is that the Nativity Canticles register a transition in the temple cultus from shadow to reality, or to use other terms, from type to antitype, in that they proclaim the arrival of the high priest of heaven who will bring the earthly temple cultus to its consummate fulfillment. So that's the thesis that I'm working with in this series, and trying to develop throughout the series.
Yeah.
Uh, Another way of putting that is simply to say that the songs in the opening chapters of Luke's gospel form a liturgical bridge between the Old Covenant and New Covenant, worship in the Old Covenant and worship in the New. And they also set the stage for the message of the Gospel of Luke as a whole, by introducing significant theological themes that Luke will develop in his gospel and in his second volume, Acts.
That's an interesting point, redemptive historically, and even, I guess, canonically, because Luke Acts is often seen as part one and part two of the same work written by Luke. I don't know exactly why they were divided, other than perhaps the both couldn't fit on a single scroll. I'm uncertain. I'm not a New Testament expert in that regard at all. But nevertheless, seeing the two and reading the two together, and then seeing the themes, the theological, and more importantly, more specifically, the biblical theological themes in Acts, and that transition to the New Covenant era with Christ giving his message to his disciples, and that Great Commission at the end of Matthew, of course, but then we see the disciples' work carrying on there early on in Acts, and then the pouring out of the Holy Spirit in Pentecost in Acts chapter 2. That transition is so significant. We have figures like John the Baptist, who certainly is highlighted early on in the Gospel of Luke, and he serves in many ways as kind of the final Old Testament prophet. But that transitional era is something that there's a lot of opportunity for theologians to study, and my own work in the covenant theology has really raised a bunch of questions in my own mind, and it's interesting and very fruitful to think about that transitional period, moving from old to new, and how many of the New Testament books seem to be focused on that transitional period. I think there's good chunks of Romans, Galatians, and Hebrews, which are all trying to encourage people to move into this new covenant era. So thinking of how these songs also serve as a bridge between old and new covenant worship is certainly something that piques my interest.
Yes, and mine too.